Hello and welcome to another edition of the Bad Dog Book Club. This is episode 3, part B. I guess that's episode 6, right?
Part B?
Yeah.
Where'd part A go?
Part A is the reading.
Oh, I thought it was just the story.
Yeah. Part A is the reading. So part B is the actual discussion. I'm Skip Ruddertail.
I'm Toonses. I'm the one that doesn't follow these things very well.
Yeah,
Skip's the one that keeps these things in order.
Yes.
I just show up and talk when I'm told to. I'm the talent.
All right, so we're going to do something a little different today. Toonses has picked us a very short, one-page reading selection to start the episode off with. So I'm going to let you tell us what that's all about.
Well, in high school, I started this collection when my school library started to condense some books, and I was looking at all these books that they were throwing out. And I found that so many of them were just very badly titled. I figured, okay, I got to start collecting these. One of my favorites were like UFOs, Serious Business, Mr. Kennedy and the Negroes, and Cats and Other People.
There's all the things the librarians were pulling off the shelves because they were terrible and out of date. You were grabbing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I can appreciate
that. So I started this collection, and this is Amish country, Pennsylvania, by the way, which I think for some reason Amish country must provide a specifically potent source for these kinds of things, because we're stuck already about 80 years in the past. I mean, so this is like new literature to us. Mm-hmm. This book came out, I believe, in the 1970s, and I found it in a $1 book bin at a credit union outside a steel mill. And it's called Help, I'm a Woman. This was published by Regular Baptist Press in 1977. Mm-hmm. This is a self-help book for fundamentalist Baptist women who, are unsure about their position beneath God and beneath men. This reminds me of a billboard that I used to drive past on my way to preschool every day that said, "At the head of every woman is man, at the head of every man is God." So these are the things that just kind of influence me when I'm growing up. The things that I notice.
Most preschoolers can't drive, so that's impressive too.
I've always been a driving cat.
Oh, okay, that's true.
But all right. So when I find these kind of books just around the area, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense that these exist and that I can find them, even though when you read them, they're completely absurd. So let me read this. This is from each chapter of this, by the way. Let me read some of these chapters here. Help, I've lost my name. Help, the budget won't balance. Help, my husband is unsaved. So this is the kind of fare you're looking for. This is from Help, I've lost my freedom. And I think a slave would be reading this. And
let's tell you the story, and then I want you to connect it. So let's hear. Take it away.
A few who are disillusioned with the race have become bitter and rebellious. Out of such feelings have arisen the women's liberation movement. In the book of Proverbs, we find some warnings about discontented women. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is his rottenness in his bones. It is better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman. Since women's lib is such an issue in our day, let us look at it more carefully. When we read God's plan for men and women as outlined in Genesis 2:24 and 3:16, we cannot help but say the goals of the women's liberation movement are anti-God. One woman has observed, women's libbers are radicals who are waging a total assault on the family, on marriage, and on children. Surely this is contrary to God's plan. In reading a modern-day magazine, Ms., I found it to be pro-abortion and sickening in the use of four-letter words. It ridicules the old-fashioned girls who desire a home, a husband, and a family. Marriage is referred to as a prison and solitary confinement. Women's lib is falsely named. It is not liberation to find oneself standing on the same ground as a man. Equality with men is a terrible burden to bear, wrote Gladys Hunt. Do supporters of women's liberation really want to be free to go to war, to drive dump trucks, to shoulder the load of self-support, to lose their privacy in public restrooms? All this and more will eventually come from the women's liberation movement. How can all this possibly be called liberation? We will always find ourselves slaves to something. William Kunnell brings this out. The entire course of life is one of submission either to God or to self, to righteousness or to evil, to constituted authority or to anarchy. We need to die to self. When many of the women in our world learn that lesson, their sorrows will turn to songs. Women's liberation will devastate women. How naive for those freedom seekers to think that a piece of legislation will solve all their grief. To give women and men equal rights is, in reality, men's liberation. They will be the real winners. No more demands will be forced on them for family support or remaining faithful to one woman. They will be footloose and fancy-free. Women will still find themselves bearing children, but now alone. They will still be subjects. They will hold no special place of honor. Yes, the selfish, sensual man becomes the real winner, and unwanted children will be sentenced to die in some brightly lit operating room. Unloved. Aborted. Reader's note. 10 ellipses there between room, unloved, aborted. But here's the good part. Part of a woman's plight is sorrow. However, having the right mate and being the right mate can turn sorrow to song and submission to sweetness. This is God's plan. Now, stuff like this tends to inspire me as a writer, more so than like great literature does. Because, great literature is just so done and complete. It's like you already see it on the wall, you already see it quoted in the books, great. But when you see something like, part of a woman's plight is sorrow, and it's not some fantastical quote you've ever read, it's just some little painful little statement being made by a woman who's trying to write a self-help book that probably just even trying to make sense of her own life. It takes on a bit more of a meaning to me. I just find stuff like that interesting. And then I see these themes expressed in stories like the one we're reading now. Mm-hmm. So even though this is porn, and it's like pulp from page 1 to page last. So, that's always a good thing. Mm-hmm. So even though it's pulp, you can find meaning in it if you can connect it to these, more these deeper things that you find in other places in your life. That's what I like about stories like the Thou Shalt Not Kill, which, do you want to give us an introduction for, by the way?
Well, I think, it sounds like maybe you'd say that, you could also title this book, Help, I'm a Companion.
Yeah.
And that'll take us into our, published by Perfection Inc. in 2017. And I think that'll take us into our introduction to today's story, which is Thou Shalt Not Kill, written by FuzzWolf. And it first appeared in Sofa Wolf Press's Anthology X. And so our thanks again to Sofa Wolf for letting us publish this, and our thanks to Fuzz for subjecting yourself to this sort of critique. But we'll be good. And
I always liked the theme for X, just the idea that you would write, one story for each of the 10 Commandments. Mm-hmm. It's cool, because it's a natural way of generating interesting prompts.
Yes.
That still have a connecting theme to them. Yeah. I think it's cool.
Neat theme. Well, and I was happy, and this is just a personal note, I was happy to see Fuzz write again. So thanks to Kyle Gold for telling Fuzz, okay, you gotta write me something for this. So it's good to see you back, buddy. All right, so where do you want to start us off, maybe? Because we got a bunch of things going on.
Well, we should probably start with the fucking.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of fucking.
Well, and that's something I do want to talk about, that it is not many stories
that have this much fucking.
I have to adjust my pants at one point. We'll put it that way. Which I was doing in the car when I was listening to it. And at another point, dry my eyes.
Aww.
So I was going to say use Kleenex, but that might have negated or been the same as the first
one.
Might
have been confusing the images.
Didn't want to confuse the audience, so there we go. But yeah, why don't we, you are the pulp writer here.
Well, I try.
You are the porn expert. I'm a porn expert, but you're a porn creator expert. And so yeah, why don't you start us off with... Even though you're pretty gay.
I'm rather gay. See, that's what I was really impressed. Because I am as gay as a May Day parade, but I was impressed by the fact that my favorite scene in this story wasn't even the ones involving 2 dongers, but just the one and then the giner. See, I've never... That's the vocab box that was on my 9th grade test, I think, that I learned last from. For health class. Back in Amish country. Abstinence only. Anyway. But I was impressed at the fact that, with the writing, for the fact that the most intriguing scene wasn't even the one I was most sexually supposed to be interested in. That was the one between Cyan and Slave. Mm-hmm. What was interesting, the dynamics here were... let me read a comment from somebody who I believe said it much better than I did. Alright, we got this comment from Funny Animal Books. He says... As smut, its crowning achievement was the sexual scene with Slave and Cyan. I was so interested in how both characters explored Slave as a kind of gender fuck, and how she specifically wanted him to strive for an orgasm like she had to do with other real men. They each share a sexual experience with this automaton that defies its base and shallow purpose.
That, by the way, whoever you are, Funny Animal Books, and it's whoever you are.
Cube Triangle on FA, actually.
Oh,
He's a very talented artist.
Well, Cube.
He's actually one of those guys who's very talented in many different kinds of art, so you should definitely check him out.
Well, Cube, perfect use of the word gender fuck, by the way, just speaking as a scholar of such things. So, no, I really, that's a perfect use there because, you guys have read or listened to the story or by now, and so you know that, it's not a conventional, missionary guy on top sex scene.
It really isn't, no.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing you have to do if you want to get somebody who is primarily disconnected from it, i.e. a gay man, to identify with it and even enjoy it. If that's going to be your goal, if you want to be able to reach out to people like that, you need to be able to reform these ideas of gender and character and just any concept you might be able to play with at all. You need to be able to have that play.
Well, and what's a gender fuck here is, I think, something that you noticed, too, when you read this story, was that, slave is a male.
A male-bodied person with a Y.
A male-bodied person.
Spelled with a Y.
Yeah. But he is presented in such a way that he is a very feminized
Yes, definitely
male.
very effeminate.
He wears panties, he wears jewelry, bangly jewelry. He wears skimpy outfits or cheerleader and need things, and so
it's actually Richard's request that he wear only panties and a leather collar.
Right. So there's one twist of conventional male gender, right? And then in the sex scene with Cyan, she's a woman, but she is larger than him. She is, definitely has a more powerful place in the society as a whole, which, like it or not, does often get carried into the bedroom.
And much more assertive and aggressive in the bedroom.
And
certainly.
much more assertive and aggressive, and, actually ends up pegging him at one point. So literally fucks him with her cock. And Fuzz actually uses that phrase, says her cock or her penis, I think it was her cock. And that's the exact way to do it. I mean, that was like spot on, perfect, nailed there was a use of the words and phrases used really fit the encounter happening.
Yes. It's intriguing. And specifically, she says that he has to work for it like she had to, which is an interesting way of putting it. He's the male, and generally the male in the sexual scene is supposed to be the one who doesn't have to work for it, who has to work for the other to get off. So it's to flip that power dynamic is a good way to get someone like me, who otherwise wouldn't be intrigued by it, to get to connect with it right away. I think it's just very impressive for a porn writer to be able to accomplish.
Well, and I think it's and a porn writer like Fuzz and a lot of us who are gay or straight, it's a challenge to write a sex scene that will appeal not only to yourself, but to people who have other sexual orientations. Yeah. And that's not an easy feat to accomplish. And I think he did it in a pretty clever way. I'm not straight. I mean, I'm bi-leaning gay, definitely. But I mean, I was like, well, this is hot. And I do read straight sex stories, reasonably often on So Furry. But it worked for me.
I think I have that blocked on So Furry. If the letter S, if it shows up, So I mean, it has to work to get through. But when it gets through to me, I can enjoy it sometimes. You say you're gay leaning on bi. I'm gay leaning on denying the existence of women.
Well, it's funny you mentioned filters, because I was talking to somebody yesterday who didn't read your latest story because they have bull filtered out.
Bull? Why bull?
They don't like bulls. Yeah. So there you go. So I don't filter anything. I'm an equal opportunity kind of guy. I'll read any, I'll take a look at any crazy thing. So,
but you do know what they say about red meat and how it affects the taste of your cum. Yes. So maybe that's why they don't like bulls.
Maybe. So but going on the sex scene thing, it's probably, it seems to be the most elaborately laid out, and probably takes up the most actual amount of words of any sex scene in the book.
Yes.
It's the most complete in terms of start to finish. all the way through and all the kind of phases of the sex.
And it's...
How does it compare to the other sex scenes?
Well, it's a tremendous contrast to the first sex scene in the second chapter, where Slave, or Unit JVCS316342, I don't know, something like that, I forget. When Slave is first arrived and is being set up, and the whole process of establishing the order here that Richard wants, he's setting up the settings he needs. It's wholly different from what you might expect from any other kind of story that might be expressing the same, exploring the same themes of dominance and submission. For a lot of people, whenever they're wanting to explore these dominant themes, there needs to be a sense of competition. Mm-hmm. There needs to be a sense of friction and a heat. Like they say, like friction causes heat, they say. That's what people want when they get there's BDSM involved. And they want there to be resistance, they want there to be moaning, and they want there to be gritting of teeth.
Often part of the thrill of it is gaining, is the mental struggle and sometimes physical, but to gain the advantage, to be, to gain dominance.
Yeah, I do think that's another one of those tags on So Furry is like competition over dominance or something like. But it's different completely in this setup scene, because when the Jaguar arrives and he's not even a slave yet, he is simply presented like as a gift essentially by the mail carrier. He's just staring straight out ahead, blank. Turns him on, and he asks for his first order. It's just the very nature of it is already naturally inclined to submission.
By fiat.
Even if Richard had wanted to be a submissive slut and have the Jaguar, rape him to the end of the day or something like that, it still would have had to start with this sort of kind of passive, submissive kind of waiting for orders kind of motif. But it continues on then as he tells him what his name's going to be, what he wants, and even the response that it causes is kind of very mechanical. Just kind of slowly causes Richard to become aroused, which is then dealt with almost like if the TV started to go fuzzy, you'd get up and hit it. Mm-hmm. Just like a casual kind of, oh, here's something that has to be dealt with. Mm-hmm. And so he gets him off. Mm-hmm. Now that's strange. It's strange because in most cases, this would not be a good way to write a pulp story. Because it's very dry and it doesn't engage you very much. It's very easy to kind of skip past it and read it only as if you're trying to glean the information. And when you're reading pulp, you don't want to just get the information. You want the imagery. You want the sensations. You want the emotion of it. But it works well in this story because it's not going to be the only sex we get in here. So it's not. That's the only payoff. Mm-hmm. It's kind of sets. It sets I don't want to say a low bar because that sounds diminishing. But it kind of sensitizes the body or desensitizes the body so that the next scene will be a bit more colorful by comparison. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's a good, it's that classic, roller coaster profile of a story, is that the intensity builds, or in most stories over time.
And this story does follow...
As they reach a climax, yeah.
It follows a different profile than you might from most pornographic stories, which follow deliberately a very steep, like one steep climb to then a downfall. Because that's more or less how people jerk off, and that's kind of what you're trying to simulate. But this is written more like an actual piece of prose where there's kind of like a falling and rising action building to maybe an eventual. And
this is, this in form, this is much more like a short novel. Or a novella, I guess, chapters. Kind of condensed around. He even
the frame
does
is really cool. I like the frame.
That the construction of the story is more like a novel than a typical short story. Here's one of the things about the sex scenes, though, is I wonder how many other people, and I'm going to just out myself here, read these sex scenes with Richard and Slave, and feel a little guilty, almost, as I did.
Well, they always do.
Because parts of it...
But that's why you need those things...
Hang on, let me finish.
All right, but I'm going to tell you part later.
Partially because I'm thinking, boy, that'd be kind of nice.
From which perspective?
From Richard's perspective.
Of course, from Richard's perspective. That's what it's supposed to be nice from.
Because I'm an otter, I'm a top otter. So, yes, that's my... perspective is that I'm sitting around like, boy, I could, wake up every morning with a blowjob.
And that makes you feel guilty. Why? Isn't the jaguar supposed to like it?
I think that's, what we get into as the story progresses, is that, yes, it's this fantastic hedonistic experience, and Tootses and I both fondly recall hedonism bot from Futurama in this situation. But, it is absolutely every desire he could have. And the question, I think, that is gradually raised, during the story, and definitely by the end is that, and maybe isn't resolved, and I think for some readers it may not be resolved, is that a relationship when you have every desire you have met by the person you're with?
Well, within the context of the story, what I had trouble identifying with sometimes was the pulp scenes aside, which were very well written. I had a little bit more trouble getting into the emotional aspect of the story because I just don't see very much in the relationship when it's just purely sexual. That might be more of a personal thing, though, because I'm not a very no one's going to believe this. Everyone's going to be dismissing this right now, but I'm not a very highly sexual person in my personal life. So for me, relationships are about other things. So by the end of the story, when Slave and Richard have developed this very intimate relationship, and all I've seen them done is just fuck constantly, I can't quite connect with that. I feel like in a logical sense, I could surely work out that maybe they developed some kind of relationship on a non-sexual level within that time that just wasn't covered in the story. Fine, I can follow that. Or I can also follow that other people can establish these connections on a purely sexual basis, and it's perfectly valid for them, and I shouldn't be distraught just because the story appeals more to them than me. Mm-hmm. But it still discolors my view of it.
Well, I've got some ideas on that, and let's maybe move to this kind of area and tease out some of these questions about the relationships in the story. Mm-hmm. And because we've got I think 3 main characters here. We've got 2 important relationships going on. Mm-hmm. Maybe you want to say 3 if you count. I don't know if you can count a sex scene as a relationship. I don't think so. We're going to say 2 main relationships going on here, and that's between Richard, our lion protagonist, and Cyan, the lioness, as Alex says, which I love. I've got to say this. I was watching something on BBC, too, and it was like, Americans will say, oh, what's that? It's a lioness. And a European will be like, it's a lioness. It's like the new 1953 Dodge Lioness with chrome.
Oh my god! I think they're so much better. They have so much more bearing than we do.
So hot. Anyway, yes, the lioness.
I don't dig it. Go back across the pond. You don't tip.
Yes, the lioness, and then the relationship between Richard and Slave, which I had to say, as a writer, as an aside, I thought it was kind of cool that Slave's name is never capitalized.
Oh, yeah. That is neat.
Did you notice that? Yep. Yeah, I expected you would, but I thought that was kind of a neat thing. Anyway.
Because it's diminishing.
So we got these relationships, and the first one we see or hear about, is Richard and Cyan. Mm-hmm. And Cyan is Richard's boss. They both work at the same company. We don't know exactly what they do. They're obviously white-collar people.
Professionals.
They're obviously, professionals. She sounds like probably a president, and he's a vice president, or something like that. Or she's a vice president, and he's a director. Something right underneath her. Mm-hmm. But And
well, that is what she wanted at the beginning of the story.
That is what she wanted, yeah. And their relationship is interesting, and it's strange for this kind of story because there is no intimacy in it. Or almost none, I think.
That's fine. Cool, good for them.
Yeah.
It's a very professional, official relationship.
Right.
This is the kind of relationship these people have. That's one of the
keys. That's why I think it's here, because this is Richard's world, I think, is that there is no distinction in his life, at least at the start of this story, between the professional relationship and a personal relationship or an emotional relationship. That they're both treated the same way. It's both goes into a situation and says, what can I get out of this? Mm-hmm. And she's doing the same thing. Also making very little distinction here. How will he help my image? How will he help my career? What can I get out of this? And that's kind of how the world works for him. That's the person he is. Mm-hmm. That there is no distinction between it. Everything is handled in this kind of professional, business-like way, even if it's, fucking someone.
It's not how he handles Slave, so he sees Slave as an escape from this?
Yeah, I think that's what starts... Well, partially. In part of the way, he does handle Slave exactly the same way, because immediately, as you said, it's, how can I get, what can I get out of this? What can this do for me?
Very quickly it develops past that, after 2 weeks of constant fucking.
It's interesting, because he's incredibly self-centered and oblivious. And that is a connection, I think, between our first story. That's one of the connections here. If we remember... Kame Hirasaki's story, and we had also an incredibly self-interested, oblivious protagonist,
and also an automaton
with a created fur, yes, an automaton. But here
a faux fur,
a faux fur, yes. But here, Richard's he's not a bad guy, and he's not a malicious guy.
He's just not a romantic.
He's just really self-absorbed. And, that's how he goes into this relationship with Slave.
Well, people wonder why guys aren't romantic. Mm-hmm. And people wonder why guys aren't, don't see the magic in going out on, a nice candlelit date or, just going out for a movie. Mm-hmm. But Richard became plenty romantic once he got to have sex for 2 weeks straight.
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah, once he got that, he was all about feeling total emotions for other people and, feeling his emotions. But what I liked about the story was that Cyan tells him this, and it's almost as if Richard completely ignores it.
Yeah.
And it also plays into the theme of whether of what Slave is and what do you buy him as, whether it's an automaton or a consciousness or whatever. Mm-hmm. She says, he's not real, he's not a person, I'm a person.
Yep.
So his
and
romance...
Then she says, but you don't see it like that, do you, Richard? You know, and he, I don't think it had occurred to him even particularly that he hadn't seen it like that until she said it.
What I think the story is trying to do, and what I think ultimately FuzzWolf is trying to get you to buy, is that Slave is a person and Cyan isn't a person. For all her blood and bone, and her single-minded directness toward her career is robbing her of her humanity, while Slave's single-mindedness, giving up of himself to Richard, kind of creates this humanity.
Okay, I can see that.
I think ultimately that's what FuzzWolf wants you to get.
For most of the story, Richard isn't a person either, and by that logic, and I will buy that because I think
he's a dynamic character here.
I think that but I'd say by that criteria for most of the story, since he's entirely self-interested, he's not really a person either. And I think maybe...
For him, it might be about becoming a person.
That's what this story is about. And I think that's the unit, because you and I were talking, and, we were trying to figure out, what's the story chiefly about? Or is there some kind of unifying factor? Because we know it is structured in this way, that there are definite sections of the story. Mm-hmm. And we have different kind of moments and interludes and encounters, and how is that tied together? And my feeling is this story is about Richard becoming a person.
Yeah.
And this is all about him, and maybe that's what is and for me, the key paragraph, I guess I'll say, is, if I may just read for a moment, this is when Richard and Cyan have been having dinner at the very nice restaurant, and Richard suddenly gets a call. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and looked at the screen to see who was calling. It said home. He looked at it quizzically. Slave never called him. He'd been designed to be very self-reliant, so he would always be an asset to him rather than someone he'd have to take care of. For me, that is the key line in the story, and that's the line that ties it all together, because I think that is the boundary of when you cross into a relationship, that they are responsible for taking care of you, and you are responsible for taking care of them. And that's kind of what Richard suddenly realizes, that, this is a person that he feels just as deeply about taking care of as Slave has been taking care of him.
Yes. So for you think the story is about how Richard becomes a person. Mm-hmm. I think the story is about getting off. Personally, I still appreciate this story mostly for the sex scenes. I'm going to be honest with you. I thought they were very well written, but I kind of think that the overlying frame. Mm-hmm. I don't really think it was about much. It was just an interesting exploration of these concepts of submission and dominance and expectations and things like that. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one of the issues that you might have with this story is that you're a good Marxist kind of thinker.
Oh no,
and
no,
I am too.
No,
I am too. I mean, that's my background.
It's more like I'm young and angry.
Is okay. Well, my background in anthropology is Marxist anthropology, which means I'm always looking at class and race and gender and all these and how these things interrelate in power. And there are a lot of little hints in here. Or little kind of asides of all these things of, class and power and race playing out. And I think, for instance, we know there is a Free the Companions movement going on. And yet that really isn't addressed.
Yeah,
and
I would say addressed
that's
more.
Yeah. Why would you like to see it addressed?
Well, I think it would have been a nice compliment to, if part of what you're going for in the story here is addressing a possibility that maybe Cyan isn't as much of a person as Slave is. A good way to foil that would have been talking about this companion freedom movement, whatever you want to call it. I don't think it gets an official name in the story. It feels kind of like it got tacked on a little bit. I would have liked to see that drawn out. I think it would have been interesting to see exactly what kind of arguments they were using, just what kind of former companions were and what they said of their experiences. That's what I would have liked to have seen.
And I would counter that by saying that the story isn't about this. The story is about Richard. It's not about the wider world, which seems a little weird. But the wider world is only a concern because this is told so strongly from Richard's point of view. I mean, he's basically narrating the story. It's so from his point of view.
Yes.
That the wider world is only a concern when it intrudes into his own world.
I see what you mean. So even though it might be this large movement outside of his world, within the context of himself and the story.
In the context of it, partially because for most of the story he is so self-absorbed and self-centered, and kind of meeting his needs, that he really isn't concerned about, what else is happening, and unless it directly infects his own life. I know one of those other, I'm sure, kind of Marxist framework things that would have jumped out at you and obviously ties directly back into our introductory reading. Is, I think, a notion of ideological constructs in that Slave kind of, it's more sexual, obviously, than the 50s housewife was supposed to be, but kind of a 50s housewife, I think.
I thought that was very much the idea, and as a contrast, Cyan represents this more modern archetype of what feminine expression is supposed to be, where she's this career-conscious woman, when really, these days, a lot of women do work as homemakers. It's called being unemployed. Should have had more jobs if you want to have, career-conscious women, I guess. Sorry, America. Get a better economy. Then you can have real equality.
Well, and if I can add another layer to this, what does it say then when a gay man wants a 50s housewife?
Who is also another man.
Right. That kind of adds this whole other kind of gender kind of permutation to it. People do if you're living to what is a very heterosexual, heteronormative, and even borderline misogynist ideology, but in the context of a gay relationship.
But don't we all just want to assimilate, really?
Shut up.
I don't want to just get married. I want to have a marriage license I can date back to 1942. That's what I want. I don't want to call it a civil union. I want you to put me in a time machine and just pretend it happened back then, so then I can tell my boyfriend to go make me a goddamn sandwich. That's
And
all
a
I've ever
martini.
really wanted.
And a martini.
Yeah. But that's what people say. I mean, that's one of the critiques of gay thought, is that it definitely privileges men, and that men, and you see these. It reminds me of one of my favorite bits of gay revolutionary literature, where they said that they would invite the women's liberation movement because they could bring muffins.
It's so offensive.
It's like, I know, right? But it's like, it makes sense. I mean, like, yeah, sure, gay people are oppressed, whatever, but they're still guys. They still have these sexist thoughts, and it kind of comes through in these. But it can be also kind of cathartic. I mean,
it's,
you and I,
one of the things that we wrestle with. You and I, particularly as white males who also happen to be gay. That is one of the things. Well, no, I mean it's one of the things that we, and Fuzz is also, I'll just disclose, is a white male who happens to be gay. It is one of the things that sometimes we find ourselves wanting this kind of thing, and then wondering why do I want this, and should I want this, and what does that say about me? Being conscious of the privileges we have as white males.
Mm-hmm. I think it's more cathartic. I don't think
kind of look at that
necessarily represents a desire to actually have something like that. It's a cathartic release sometimes to see, because in the context, it can sometimes be so absurd just to think, okay, yeah, it's a story where we're talking about like 1950s archetypes of feminine ideals being projected onto gay identity, but then also it's a story about robot animals fucking each other. It's absurd. And I think the absurdity is what makes it cathartic. It's like we can only make these constructs work in our head if we can put them to such obtuse, wonked out terms that like it's completely already divorced from what reality is.
Well, that's always been one of the I think strengths of good sci-fi, is that it sometimes lets us look at these issues that are really upsetting or really troubling in our own lives from a distance. And this isn't the point of that story, but it's a little, I think it's a piece of it that enters into it.
People always say that a hallmark of good literature is having it being able to internalize something in you, but I also think it's useful to be able to externalize something from you. If you can get a good piece of literature that can absolutely kind of remove this pressure from you, it's just as valid as being as reading something that might be able to make you feel some other kind of emotion.
Right. Well, and it
that's what good porn's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to take the pressure off.
Now that I've been on this kick of race and gender and stuff, I want to take it onto this little thing of the species choice, because that isn't something we've really talked about much yet.
Geez.
But I think it's something that we might start. And I've talked with some authors who are like, oh yeah, I don't care. I mean, I have like the wheel.
I'm lost.
Or whatever, whatever animal I'm thinking of, like that's who's going to be in my story. And some authors make a very conscious choice that these are the species I'm picking. And even if they don't say it, but they have deep reasons. And I think that might be the case here.
What cause do you think it is?
Richard and Cyan are lions. They're African lions. Right. And, they're king of the beasts. And both of them really kind of are working to embody that role.
The alpha types, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. They're apex predators, which means they are the highest in the food chain, in real life. So in their area, in their niche, they're number one, and they're both trying to be that. And Richard and Cyan, their relationship is so dominated by by these struggles, and one gets the feeling that their sex life is every time they meet up, there's a struggle to see who's going to be in charge tonight. And so both of them are really trying to kind of live up to this expectation, and fight their way there. And I think that's part of why Richard goes for this odd thing where he's still king, but now he's a king that he doesn't have to fight to be so. Yeah. And that's key if you look at real life lions hubris too, though, because real life lions, like if a male gains control of it, the males will fight. He will fight to gain control of a pride of lionesses. He'll probably, control the pride, be the male who breeds with them for 2-3 years, and at that point, a younger male or a coalition of males will come along and either chase or kill him off. So it's a position he constantly has to fight to enforce and ensure. And so I think there's a little parallel here where, this is probably the dream of every lion out on the African veldt is, can I keep my harem without having to fight for it all the time?
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of a neat little connection.
And
Jaguars,
jaguar?
It's another cat.
Jaguar's
another cat.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Can you do jaguar in the English accent?
Jaguar.
Jaguar.
You kind of gotta like bring out the U and almost remove the R totally. So,
Jaguar.
Instead of a jaguar, like we say it in the U.S., like it's like it's Jagwar. In the U.S. In English, it's like jaguar.
American number one. That's the correct way to say it.
I guess it's Jaguah. I always drag my jaguar.
My jaguar.
Anyway. Moving on, jaguar is another big cat, but a smaller big cat. And...
So you got that beta male thing going on?
Well, it's familiar, but it's different, and it's familiar. It's familiar enough to be comforting to me to be another cat, but to not be another lion who might be a rival.
Correct. Well, Cyan, I believe, is the rival in this.
Oh, yeah.
Correct.
Cyan is definitely the rival. Do we want to read a couple letters we got from people?
Oh,
we actually got letters this time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna.
How many of them were mean?
They were good. They were good.
Oh,
everybody
good.
really liked the story. We had people brought up some issues with it, and or things they wanted to ask about. I'm gonna read one from Candrel, and then I think you've got one from Drakir, right?
Sure.
All right. So Candrel writes. Hiya, naughty canines. So, and I will just, straight off the bat, that Toonses is a cat.
A driving cat.
And I am an otter. And neither of us are canines. Even
and
though we work for Bad Dog Books.
Either.
Our producer is a canine. But, anyway.
And no raccoons here.
Next time, Candrel, fix that. Before I begin, I have to ask, what is it with you two and your emo simulacrums porn? Just like it says in the stories, it's not healthy, it's not natural. Yes, we did have a little thing here. It said we came here in Saki. We also had a created first. So, and actually I had another submission from an author which also had a created first. So we're going to have to wait several months for that one, so we don't become the podcast about
Sorry, everybody.
created manufactured furs. But yes. We'll take a little break.
We burnt that pharmacy down.
Yes. Okay, though I guess I have to admit, Thou Shalt Not Kill was hot. The pervasive sexuality of the two main characters really sets a tone for the story that it carries throughout. Even though the end left me with a bit of a sniffle, I call any man heartless who was unaffected by it.
I'm raising my hand.
It wasn't a story about the death. While Slave's death was the highlight and closing note for the story, it struck me as much more a story about the celebration of life. It's a story about one slave choosing to live through months of malfunction to bring happiness to the one he loves. So tell me your opinion on this quandary. I believe every story has a range of emotions that it evokes in the reader at different intervals after having read the story. What were the order of yours after finishing Thou Shalt Not Kill? For me, after the initial sadness of the downbeat ending faded, the aftertaste wasn't so much bitter as bittersweet. In essence, I might call it a sad story that leaves you happy, at least that is, eventually. Looking forward to your deconstruction, Candrel. Alright, so yeah, if we can, I want to talk about the end of the story for a minute, because I think this really speaks to that. Because I think the ending's very interesting, because it's, for me at least, it wasn't so much an ending. If it is a story about Richard and the slave, it's the end. If it is instead a story about Richard becoming a person, because he learned, he starts caring about other people and things around him, then it's the beginning of his story. Mm-hmm. That this is all leading up to, we don't know what happens next. I mean, the ending, by the way, I love the ending, Fuzz. He pressed the button. It's just gut-wrenching. Perfect. There you go. But, we don't know what happens the next day, but you can kind of start seeing, or the things that I definitely hope, start happening to Richard the next day. And I think that, you can look at this and say, did they love each other? Or, could they love each other? And I think, you might have a question about that. I don't think, and that's the tragic aspect of this story, is that they were at the beginning of what could have been a relationship when Slave dies. I think they're starting to understand, Richard's understanding that this is a two-way street, and that it's about not just me, it's about us. And that's unfortunately, unfortunately when Slave dies. That could be the start of a relationship. And I've been, there, it is true. Sometimes you can say, there's this person I met, 6 months ago, which is, what this is or so, and say, I love them. That's going to be a very different, what you mean when you say you love this person that you've been dating for 6 months is very different than what you say when you say, I love this person that I've been with for 12 years or 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was, it's not, we don't know, and I think we don't know if, maybe it wouldn't have worked out if Slave had lived. Maybe, they couldn't have gone on together because of how the nature of their relationship had been. We don't know. And that's kind of the tragedy of it, that I think this was right at the beginning of Richard being a person, right at the beginning of a relationship is when our story ends. And so it's very tragic in that way. But it is, if we do see it as the beginning for Richard, it's a very hopeful story in that way. So I do follow your point there. I think maybe I saw a different aspect of it making it hopeful for me. But I do kind of agree with you, Candrel. Did you have anything to...
Well, I said earlier, the ending just didn't quite resonate with me because I feel like there's a certain disconnect between what constitutes Richard's and Slave's relationship and what I would typically look for in a relationship. So it didn't have quite the emotional weight to me, but it was still a great story. I don't think you need a whiz-bang emotional ending to enjoy the story. And a lot of other people did connect with it, so good times.
And we have another story, which Toons is going to read to us.
Usually other people express these things better than I can, so we got this comment from Drakir on the blog. He said, the lion purchased the jaguar as a pet and named him Slave. Throughout the story, he treats Slave as a possession. There are points where he seems to put more thought into Slave's life, but at the same point, they are fairly superficial. What does he do while I'm at work? Well, I've had the same thoughts about my cat. He thinks about buying Slave clothes so he can take him out and show him off since Slave would enjoy that, but that is just his conjecture. He never asks Slave about this, and Slave never expresses that desire. It is his own gratification he is seeking. We are told the jaguar's mental programming is breaking down, but the jaguar didn't notice. The entire time the jaguar continued to be his slave, doing whatever he could to please his master. So while we are told that he has become more than a pet or a possession, he didn't grow beyond what he was designed for. So did he in fact have his own personality? Was he more than a pet? Mm-hmm. And I think these are valid questions to ask, and not every question needs to be answered for a story to be good, so you want to, temper your criticism, but for people like me, we might have wanted to see something like this addressed. It might have connected this to a little bit better, but at the same time, having addressed our needs, you might have turned off some other people that did like the story, so, that's how I always approach it.
I honestly really agree with what he says, but I think that's, that is Richard for most of the story, is that, this is a pet, who also he happens to have sex with and who makes dinner for him. And that, for much of the story, he doesn't, see him as much more than that. I really agree with Rick here. I think that, but then it gets
I think
to the end.
It's nice for you to see Richard grow, while some of us don't care if Richard grows or not. We couldn't care less. It'd be like seeing...
But that's what the story's about.
If
Richard doesn't grow, the story isn't about anything.
Does it have to be about anything? I mean...
I think so.
Oh, the story doesn't have to think about anything.
Okay.
It could be just about fucking, and that's really what we're all here for, isn't it?
All right.
The fucking.
All right. The last question, I think I spoke to a little bit about with the last letter. Is this love? Can he express this, or is he going haywire? Or what does that mean if he is? And I think it's a good question. And I'm not sure the story definitively answers that. I think you can ask that question, was this just going haywire? What's happening here? Or is he still responding to programming? And we can't really be sure. The point again, since this is so from Richard's point of view, is Richard believes him. And Richard believes it was real. And that's what's going to change Richard, assuming he changes. So that'd be my take on that. But I am a romantic.
Why don't you just change continents?
What?
Jaguar.
Jaguar.
Do you think that's how Richard pronounced it? Jaguar. Yes,
No.
I'd like one perfect Jaguar.
If I was down in
please.
Texas, I'd be like, I got one of them Jaguars.
He probably thought he was ordering a car, and then, what the hell is this thing? Oh, I guess I'll just fuck it.
I don't know, we have anything else that we haven't gotten to that we wanted to bring up today? I think I had a pretty good discussion here. Again, I really enjoyed the story. I loved everything about it. And even though I'm like sitting here driving down I-95, adjusting my pants. You know?
Well, that's terrible. See,
And it had nothing to
distracted
do with
driving.
Alex's voice, I swear. Alright. Next week's story is one I picked out. And actually, I got a couple. Next one's one I picked out. It's by White Yote, or if you're so inclined, White Yoti. You know, some people say coyote, some people say coyote. And it is called 1 Week, and it's a shorter one. It's, again, a very personal one, and it's a little heavy, just to warn you. I think you'll enjoy it, though. And the following week, we've already got the following story lined up. And that one's much lighter and happier, so I think we'll get out of this.
All right.
You know,
Get
this
out
is
of
good
the winter
stuff,
doldrums.
but yeah, we got to get out of the winter doldrums.
Come on, spring,
so we're working
the
on
flowers
that.
going to be blooming.
We're getting springy. And then I think Toonses is working on, he's finding us a story that'll be for the first one in April, so we're moving along fast here. All right, stay tuned next week, and well, this has been another episode. This is episode 3B of the Bad Dog Book Club with
Indeed.
Skip Ruddertail.
And Toons is the driving cat, the cat that can drive a car who isn't a raccoon.
Yes. And our producer has been Alex Vance, so take care and see you next week.
Ciao.